You are listening to Ruthie's Table 4 in partnership with Montclair.
David Chipperfield and I have been friends for so long that this morning I had to ask him when we met. He reminded me it was in Paris. Richard was building the Pompidou and David was a student. The light has shone bright since then for this Pritzker and Stirling Prize-winner, the Neuss Museum in Berlin, Hepworth Wakefield, and many others. A few months ago, David asked me to see the work his foundation is doing on the food markets in Galicia, their crucial roles in sustainability, the economy, and culture. And so here I am in northwest Spain, about to talk to him in front of an audience for a special live event. David's introduction to Galicia was 33 years ago on a visit to Corrubedo, a small seaside village where he and his wife, Evelyn, created a home. Now they have a small bar in the middle of the village. David is as passionate about Galicia's farm-to-table culture as he is about its people. For him, it's all part of the same conversation that I am so excited and grateful to be having here with him in Casa Ria. David and Evelyn think that I went to have my hair done today, but really what I was doing is looking for an apartment to live here, because in the last 48 hours, having never been here before, I've been in bars and 11 o'clock at night. I've eaten a pig's nose and a pig's tail and a pig's ear. I've met ambassadors and artists and fashion designers, and I've seen, really what I've seen here in the last 48 hours is the connection here in Casa Ria. It could be in the market, it could be meeting someone who is going to sell us their fish. It's just a constant flow of connection and engagement and empathy and fun and interest in the people who live here. And I'm in awe of what they do, and I feel so lucky and happy, and the only emotion I feel right now is that I don't want to go home.
Thank you, Ruthie. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's a really impressive group of people tonight, so thank you for coming. Ruthie has been instrumental in changing the food culture of London. Your interest in where food comes from and sourcing food, because you talk a lot about that when I hear you talking a lot about where you get your tomatoes from. Galicia has this food culture. It has this food production culture. It has this small-scale production. We've got many here. And at the same time, we've seen an enormous migration of young people from the rural because it's a hard life. The parents want them to go away and go to university. It doesn't matter what they study. And there isn't enough development of those agricultural industries into the modern world. So we've got no new model. We've only got the old model, the antique model of small-scale farming. And that is tough. And this is a topic that we're interested in a way. How do you keep young people interested, and how does the administration, in a way, put confidence in that?
I'm encouraged by a lot of really good, thinking about food, about small farms, about farmers, about young people. I think the exciting thing is also that I was talking to, we buy our tomato in jars for the winter to cook tomato sauce in Puglia, and he was telling me today that a lot of the people from Puglia, young people, because how do you keep young people wanting to stay in the communities where they grew up? And of course you want them to go explore the world, but you also know how important the culture is. And he was saying that people in Puglia young people have gone to Milan to become bankers or, work in industry or work in tech. And I starting to come back because what draws them back is the quality, the quality of food that they can do. It's exciting. They can make, jar tomatoes in beautiful jars with beautiful graphics and make them, interesting. And then they can experiment. In Mexico, we have so many friends who are making, their parents were traditional, made mezcal or tequila, and they're doing it in a different way. The wine producers that we work with in Italy, Renzo's generation, they were farmers who made wine. And now these young they're now in their 40s or 50s, decided when they inherited it, they go to LA, California and France and Bordeaux and see how to make wine in a different way. Came back and changed the wine production of, into great wines. And so I think if we can encourage people to work, because food and farming, agriculture and production is so exciting.
One might say very superficially here that the margins get very small now, and therefore the hospitality is very tough because bars and restaurants can't afford to pay their staff that much.
Yeah.
And I think they pay them very fairly and reasonably, in a general. But it's a very long day. It's a very hard business,
It's tough. We glamorize being a chef. We think, oh, it's passion to be a chef and work in a restaurant. But for a lot of people, it was either going in the army or going to be a chef. And then if you became a chef, it was so hard because you had to be there at 4 a.m. You had to stoke the fire. You had to be bullied by somebody who told you what to do. And then everybody woke up and said, wait a minute, we don't have to be like this. You can come into work at 9. You can work 5 days a week. You can be fed. You can use good ingredients. You can be taught. You're not allowed to be, if somebody bullies you, you go to the police. There was a whole way of making actually working in food in a restaurant, something that people wanted to do. And I think it could be the same with farming.
And do you get staff easily? Because do they want to work in
I hope they do. Yeah, it's been, we have had...
How many people do you have?
About 120. But we have a shop, we have a cafe, and we do off-site. We do, we do events and that. But I think whether you have 12 or whether you have 100, it's the way your culture, again, back to the culture. What makes somebody want to be an architect? What makes somebody want to be a fashion designer? What draws you? And I think farming is a real struggle. It can rain when you need sun, and it can have sun when you need rain, and it can be nobody buys corn anymore. It's very hard. You're working in wine is like farming. They have a bad rain and then a hail, and then, we know that. So how do you make it, though, part of something that you want to do?
A few people say we're just not willing to pay enough for our food, and that's one of the problems. A lot of the restaurants here, they are very fixed in prices, and it's a much flatter society here. It's much more difficult to leverage money out of food. The margins are quite tight. But at the same time, I would say the qualities are very high.
Yeah, really high. I've eaten so well here. Really, from the lunch we had, I can name all the meals we've had, and I've only been here a short time.
You've had a pig,
lunch,
and you've had the
fish. What
rodaballo?
about the fish we had the first day? Getting off the plane and having that fish, and then sitting in your bar that night, and the pig, but the breakfast and the tortillas, and what David and Evelyn and Celeste are doing here. I mean, the kitchen here is amazing.
Anecdotally, it's often said that we're buying more cookbooks but doing less cooking. Clearly, the idea that people still cook is pretty fundamental part of the whole food ecology. I mean, do you have the feeling that people are still cooking?
I think they are. I think, young people who can't, maybe afford to go out, or they have children at home and don't go out. I think that cookbooks are kind of aspirational. Nora Ephron wrote a very famous essay for Gourmet saying, I get Gourmet magazine every month, and I look at it from cover to cover, and I've never made a recipe, And I think there is that thing of looking at a cookbook and thinking, I will make this, I will do it, I'll be a better person if I do, or whatever. And then you put it away and you go back to making what you do. But I do think people like to read. I think the internet has changed. A lot of people look at recipes online, which is great, or on YouTube, which is great. I think that anything that makes people want to cook. Do people cook for you? Do your friends cook for you?
Yes, but there's certainly a sort of London dinner party cooking. But I suppose I'm talking about, every day for your kids.
Yeah. I think it's hard. It is really hard because now we're all working. The idea of one of the woman who stayed home and shopped and prepared and cooked and food was on the table when you came home. it has changed. It's just a lot of pressure because very often those women are going to do the night shift at Amazon, or they'd rather do homework with their kids than cook a meal for them. I'd like to take the value judgment out of it. I would like people to think instead of ordering on Deliveroo, I can put a bag of pasta in the boiling water and serve it with broccoli, and you're done. But I think the reality is it's hard. It's hard to do everything.
As things become more and more expensive, even to buy, then the reliability of processed food that you can buy becomes simpler. Again, slightly anecdotal, but I heard a mother talking on BBC Radio 4 saying that she tried, and she felt morally under stress to cook every night for her children and sit down. She said, but I can cook reasonably well and I can do it. But so many of my friends don't know how to cook.
Yeah.
And also that it's a risk, because if you go and buy things and you don't cook your supper well for your kids, you might have blown your budget. And secondly, they might not want to eat it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you give them process, a hamburger or something that's guaranteed. And your friend, Jamie Oliver, so those of you that know the chef Jamie Oliver, who had has had really big influence in England, came from your kitchen. No, I mean, he was
17,
one of your kids.
Yeah, he was. He is still.
And he's been an incredibly good advocate for sort of normal food. I think Blair appointed him as a sort of ambassador for school food. So they tried to improve school food. But how do you see the larger food culture?
Well, to your first point about people not cooking at home and not knowing how to cook, I go back to Blair and would say education, 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 because I think how do you judge a culture? How do you judge a society? I could take Paris, where if you walk, I have a photograph of a école maternelle, which is a state school for young children, and they put their menus on the outside of the school, and you see, they start with celeriac remoulade, and then they have a soup, and then they have a fish or a meat, then they have a cheese course for 4-year-olds, and then they had a dessert. And I have this photograph, and I thought, that tells you something. I think that tells you something about a culture that prioritizes feeding little children well, for free. This is not a private school. And I think that the way a society feeds their children, the way they feed sick children, I could go on and on. I don't want to get too political, but I really do think that the way, and I can see it here, you can see in the market, you can see the way somebody offered me. One thing I thought I would do is buy a piece of cheese today because I hadn't, been able to do that. And she wouldn't take it, she gave it to me. And that culture of sharing and
That's not always true. Sometimes they take money.
Well, they didn't take it from me.
For the food.
They didn't take it, but it was just, I don't know, it's the way somebody cuts a piece of bread. I think it really goes deep into a culture. How we can fix it, I think, is not sure. But I do think if we invest in people, then it will help.
Japan now, Japan had an anxiety because they shifted diet a bit. They're eating more Western foods, and they panicked about child obesity, and they were getting a large percentage of child obesity. So they introduced regulations into school. All school food now has to be produced on the school. It all has to be fresh food. It has to be cooked in it. And they've got child obesity down to 4% or something. So it's as simple as that, surely. And isn't it about...
Well, in our schools, they have candy machines, don't they? They're a machine that sells sweets, So it's a complex issue. I think cooking is joyous, I think that it is fun, it brings people together. I think that there are so many ways to do it, and I think that, there are ways to communicate that and to give that to people, definitely. And, as you say...
But you need a food culture.
Yeah.
And presumably, at a certain point, these things have to be stimulated or promoted or encouraged by simple regulations or not. We saw something in England which I was quite surprised at. They the last government, Conservative government, put a tax on sugar in drinks, no?
It's happened in Mexico, a huge difference. And
Yeah.
you must have noticed it, that apparently, they taxed Coca-Cola and because people were buying huge bottles, and that has really helped. Yeah, I agree.
Your whole food thing began in the office. It was the canteen of Richard Rogers Architects. Why did you do that? Tell us how it started with Rose Gray and how did the whole thing begin?
I'll shorten it because it's a long story. But Richard and I were living in Paris, where he was designing a building. And we came back to London, having lived in Paris for 5 years. And it was Richard, really thought that he didn't want to move into a building in the city or a building, in an office. He wanted to create a community. And I think living in Paris made us very aware of being, outsiders and sticking together quite closely with people we worked with our family. And so when we came back, he really looked for a place where there could be a community. And we found these warehouses on the Thames, which quite in the western part of London, Hammersmith, and they were originally Duckham's Oil, and so there was noisy, it was dirty, it was quite industrial. And he and his partners bought the site and tore down one of the warehouses so you could see the river. They took a large part of the space, but there was somebody who framed paintings, there was graphic designers, there was another architect. The idea was how to create a community, and the most important thing for Richard, being Italian, having lived in France, loving food, mother was a great cook, was gathering together over food. How could you do that? And so there was a very small space. And we talked about it. I'd worked in publishing and I worked in the office doing books, and I was trained as a graphic designer. And so the idea was we would interview various restaurants or small cafes that would want to come into this very small space. And I can actually remember the night that we were skiing, and I turned to Richard and said, the only thing worse than not having a place to eat would be to have a mediocre one. And these are mediocre. I think I'll do it. I honestly said, I think I'll do it. And so from that idea, we went back to London, and Rose Gray, a magnificent woman who was a great friend of Zad's family as well, had come back from New York. She'd worked with Keith McNally on setting up Nell's, and she was back in London. She was cooking. And I said, let's go, can we meet for a coffee? Neither of us really knew very much about doing a restaurant.
But the reason you wanted to do it was because you wanted this to be a sort of social center of the campus.
A place where people could come and have lunch. We weren't even allowed to open. We wanted to open to the public. We wanted to be the best Italian restaurant in London. The idea that we wanted to start a canteen for the office wasn't really our idea, but we had the restriction of not being allowed to open to the public, and we could only be open for lunch.
And why Italian?
That's a good question, yeah. Richard's family were in Florence. His mother was Italian from Trieste. We spent a lot of time in Italy. And Rose had actually lived in Lucca for 2 years with her children.
I had the sense that you were also, it wasn't just Italian food, it was the idea that you were also interested in where the food came from. And you did all your trips, research trips about where the recipes came from.
Yeah. We really wanted to cook the kind of Italian food that we had eaten in Italy. And if you went to restaurants, Italian restaurants in London were mostly run and started by managers or waiters. And they brought the kind of food that they thought people would want to eat in London. Quite heavy, parmigianis, which are delicious, spaghetti with meatballs, cheap Chianti. And we wanted to bring the kind of food that we had cooked and eaten in Italy. Bread soups, pasta sauces that were simple.
That all seems fairly obvious now, but 35 years ago, that must have been
It was very challenging. We used to go to Italy and bring back Parmesan cheese. We used to go and bring back a prosciutto. I remember carrying a prosciutto. And famously, Rose once brought back a huge pumpkin, and she gave the pumpkin a seat in business class, and she sat in economy, But it changed. It did change.
And have you seen that change over these years?
Yeah, radically. Yeah. I mean, I think that as I sometimes say, when cheap flights started happening, that you could fly to Florence or fly to Naples for 15 pounds, more and more people went to Italy and thought, wow, I can eat this in Italy. I'd like to eat it in England. In the beginning, we'd serve a papa pomodoro, which was made of bread and tomatoes and basil, and people would say, well, at the time, why should I pay £5 for this? People became much more involved, I think, in the kind of food you could eat.
And what other changes have you seen over this period? I mean, what else is...
Well, it's been 37 years, so there has been, I think, people, eating out more. I think that people go to restaurants, do want to know about sourcing. And then I think for us, a big radical step was when we became involved with the people who produced our wine. And so, we were very Tuscan-based in the beginning, but then we went to Piemonte to meet the wine producers, or Sicily to meet the wine producers, or Puglia. It took us into the world of people who were creating something, and then also people who were then starting to really think about bringing food from Italy to England. We brought back seeds. We brought back the seeds for Cavolo Nero. I have to give Rosa credit for that, and found a farmer near Southampton who grew it for us, and so we were able to have Cavolo Nero in 1989, when nobody even could get it at all. So we could make Ribollita. You can't make Ribollita really without Cavolo Nero. And then became very involved in olive oil as well, because the people who make the wine also make the olive oil. So we bottled our own olive oil. We'd go and do that.
I used your cookbooks for, 30 years or whatever. And I think the cookbooks were also a way of explaining the idea of River Cafe, no? I mean, do you have that feeling that they were sort of fundamental to the idea of the River Cafe, not just as a place, but as another way of looking at food?
Yeah. When we were asked to write our first cookbook, the River Cafe cookbook, and we said, we're not cookbook writers, we're, chefs, so no. And then we started thinking, well, how can we, in a way it almost became a handbook for the people who worked. So they'd come up, a chef would be working and say, how do I make rotolo, or how do I make a tomato sauce? And we'd have to explain. And then we thought, well, if we write them down, and I think it's a long story again, so I won't, but the cookbooks, the first cookbook that we did, we wrote the recipe down, we took a photograph of the food right away, no styling, we just took, and it's like, if you follow these directions, you will be able to make something that we make. It's simple, it's easy, it's accessible. This is the way we cook in the River Cafe. This is the way you can cook at home. It was kind of bringing restaurant food to the domestic kitchen.
An open kitchen in the River Cafe means we as chefs are able to talk to our guests dining in the restaurant. And now we're bringing that same ethos to our podcast, a question and answer episode with me and our two executive chefs. Send a voice note with your question to questions@rivercafe.co.uk, and you might just be our next great guest on Ruthie's Table 4.
I wonder if we should open it up to some questions, give you the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being here. And question from me, I know that you have a very particular culture at the River Cafe, the way that you train the staff to care about the food, the trips that you do to Italy to source, even hiring people that have trained at Ballymaloe in Ireland. Could you talk a little bit more about how you instill that into every single day?
Yeah. Well, the Italy trips are really, something that Rose and I did when we were just starting out. And we thought, I really like David and Evelyn do, to have a personal relationship. So we started out with the people that we bought our wine from. And then we realized that for a lot of the young people working in the River Cafe, cooking, making the thinnest ravioli you can see your hand through, or doing a slow-cooked veal sauce, or making a polenta cake, they were cooking great food, but a lot of them, I think life is about exposure. And I just say the way my children have been exposed, or my friends' children. And so they hadn't been exposed to actually Italian life or Italy. And so we started taking chefs and managers and waiters, and they became really important. We still do it. Now we take, because we're bigger, we take about 15, 16 people to Tuscany. We do it around the olive oil. and we take them to see how olive oil is made, the pressing, the olives, and then the producers give us, it's quite hard work. You get up in the morning, I know, and then you go to a winery, you taste the wine, you see the olive oil, then you have lunch, always in the house of the producer. Again, it's a home-cooked Italian meal, Tuscan meal, and then you do it again and you go to it. So but they come back so excited and so knowledgeable, so that when they pour that bit of olive oil over somebody's bruschetta, they really respect it and they understand it. And so that's the Italy trip. Then I suppose we change the menu every meal. So the chef comes in and writes a menu depending, like you do at home, what we have in the fridge, what have we ordered, what's left over, how do I feel, what would I like to eat if I was eating in the River Cafe tonight. So I think that gives a lot of interest. And also the chefs come in and they don't know what they're going to cook. So that gives a kind of interest. And then I suppose we have, again, the open kitchen. We work in a kitchen where it's so open that nobody can shout, which is, you have a kind of order, which is, I once said to a friend of mine as a director, look at the kitchen, isn't it like a play? And he said, no, actually, Ruthie, it's like a ballet, because everybody's moving the whole time, and you go over to the grill and say, is it ready yet? Or you go, to the pasta and say, are you done? Then can I put the lamb on now? So I think making, and we
they
don't.
feel part of the room.
And a team, and also we don't really encourage people to do more than 5 shifts and sometimes 6. They can't do more than 1 double, and they have to have 2 days off, usually in a row. And that, again, gives you a sense of a genuine place. Everybody has a view out to the river. If you're on the bar, you can look out. If you're, washing up, you can move outside. So we try and create an environment like that. But we're not alone. I think a lot of people are doing that. That's not to say, I just want to say that it sounds like we're a family, happy, cozy, hugging restaurant. We're actually, if that, curtain goes up at 12:30 and you haven't done your sauce or you haven't grated the cheese or you haven't squeezed your lemons, you're in trouble, because our role is to make a happy kitchen, but it's really rigorous. We have people coming in to eat, and the whole attention is on, is the carpet cleaned, are the menus out? It's very professional too.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I may lower the level of the discussion here with this silly question, but I dare to ask you, and that's because perhaps I'm an Anglophile, because I love Yorkshire pudding.
Yorkshire pudding,
And I was wondering what it would be like, and my question is, what would it be like, how you imagine, what would be the difficulties, the challenges, or even perhaps the success of opening a British restaurant in Rome, for instance?
Oh. I thought it was going to be opening. Yeah. I think that, I can't take Rome, but I know that Hawksmoor and there's another restaurant opening in New York, and bringing very much kind of Yorkshire pudding and roast beef to New York. Rome, not sure.
But after Yorkshire pudding, what do you do? What's the next English thing?
Fergus
Pizza,
Henderson
curry.
has done, Fergus has done lots of, we were talking about that today, that it would just be great if when you went to have dinner at Buckingham Palace, you had steak and kidney pudding or roast beef instead of a kind of faux French meal, that you would actually celebrate British cooking. And I think sometimes when you talk to people about, growing up in Lancashire or Yorkshire or Cornwall, they will talk, oh, my mother used to make this dish, and they will wax lyrical about their grandmother's cooking. So I'm sure it's there. I don't think it does translate very easily to restaurants. The best British cooking I've had has been in people's houses, really great food. That's mom, it's eating in people's houses, I think. I'm not sure how it translates to restaurants. Rome, I'm not sure. Yeah.
We'll leave it to you for a minute to open the first British restaurant in Barcelona.
Yeah. People asked me if I wanted to open a river cafe in Milan, and I thought, no way. I don't think they'd really want, an American and a British woman doing Italian food in Milan. I'm not sure.
If I can say as a complete foreigner to Galicia, one of the things that I find quite interesting is there's a tendency for Galicians to like their own food above others, which is quite unique. Because if you're in London, you say, what sort of food do you like? But no one will say English food. Oh, I like Thai. But here, given a choice between a Galician product and another product, is it from here or not? It's from okay. And I think that's an incredible place to begin.
Yeah, I do too.
Because if, as we are now concerned, that local and seasonal is an issue, then you do need to want to be restricted by those things, as opposed to thinking that they're penalties. Why can't I have something? There's very few things now in a London context, that people would understand that you can't give them this time of the year. No? I mean, your restaurant is one of the few, I would say, that you sort of positively gravitate towards things which are seasonal. And your cookbooks have done that. But I would say one of the struggles in terms of sustainability is to persuade people that you can't have any product at any time from anywhere at any season. And I think if you're trying to talk about sustainability, I would have to say, and this is my, it's what the foundation talks about a lot, is I think actually the food culture here is in a very healthy state because, in a sense, the culture is already sort of on board. They're very unadventurous in a way. When I first came here, I was surprised that you look at a menu and it just has the same things. Every restaurant you go to, it's 12 things. Now I think it's fantastic. Ruthie, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Ruthie's Table 4 in partnership with Montclair.